You can feel it, right? We're moving toward new threats of a shutdown, nationwide. Well, it's instructive to check in on Sweden. Remember, this was the prevailing narrative on its less restrictive approach.
Sweden is a big problem in terms of its death rate and its economy. It's a red spot now on the map of Europe.
A lot of them are seeing what's happening in Sweden as a bit of a caution to those pushing to ease restrictions.
What might have happened if we'd never shut down businesses or schools, just let life go on as normal? Well, they did just that in Sweden, and many now believe the experiment failed.
Such bad reporting. One of our next guests pointed out an important trend in the Sweden data, pointing to these three graphs. First, a look at deaths by day in Sweden. Deaths peaked in early weeks and have declined ever since. Number two, the positive tests by day. There's no relationship between the peak in cases and the peak in deaths. Third, deaths by age. Nearly all deaths were over 70. Most were over 80. And it's the same everywhere. Joining us now is Alex Berenson, former New York Times reporter, author of Unreported Truths About COVID-19 and Lockdowns. Also with me, Phil Kerpen, president of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Alex, critics will say there's nothing to learn from Sweden. They had all those deaths in the old folks' homes as well. Denmark did better per 100,000. What's your response?
Well, I mean, that's absurd. Sweden is a major country that pursued a different strategy. And if you look, I would say the one mistake that Sweden seems to have made is they didn't protect the nursing homes aggressively enough. And in fact, there was a very good Wall Street Journal article in June suggesting that in some cases they'd actually allowed older people to die rather than getting them into ICUs. That was clearly a big mistake on their part. However, if you look at the overall picture in Sweden, they have had fewer deaths per capita than Italy, France, the UK, or Spain, four major European countries. They've done it without blowing up their educational system, without major shutdowns that have been societally disruptive. And there's reason to believe, if you look at the more recent data, that they'll not talk about herd immunity. They don't like to use that term, but that they may have actually gotten there or close to there, because deaths and ICU admissions are very low this month. And it's hard to explain why that is, if, considering that they are seeing cases, if the virus hasn't actually kind of burned its way through the most vulnerable segments of the population. So, it's still too early to tell that, that they've definitely gotten through this, but the signs are positive for them.
And Phil, speaking of what Sweden didn't do, which is to close all its schools, the Washington Post is reporting tonight that the superintendents in Fairfax County, Loudoun County, and Montgomery County, all surrounding Washington, D.C., are calling for all virtual classes to start the school year, scrapping earlier plans we reported on to do partial online, partial in school. Phil, what are these school districts putting ahead of the kids and their well-being here?
Well, Laura, this is 100% pure negative partisanship. This is politics. This is because President Trump said to open the schools. They are sacrificing the education of our children and the ability of parents to have sanity and children to have social and emotional development, to catch up on badly needed classroom instruction. There is zero health rationale for this. A new study just came out of the UK today. They said that there is not a single confirmed case in the entire world of a student infecting a teacher. Not one confirmed in the entire world. We know that students are at far lower health risk. All children are at far lower health risk with COVID than they are with seasonal flu every single year. And so if this were based on health, logically they could never open again. But this is not based on health. This is based on politics.
Alex, this is political. This is going to devastate American families, and it's being done to set up this election, is it not? This is disgusting news. Scott Brabrand, who's the superintendent at Fairfax, should be ashamed of himself.
It is disgusting, and it's happening all over the country. And just to go back to Sweden for a second, because it's very interesting, Sweden and Finland did a study comparing the two countries' schools, because schools in Finland closed for about 2 months. Schools in Sweden never closed. They found that rates of infectivity, rates of hospitalization, rates of death among kids 1 to 19 were exactly the same in both countries. In fact, no children aged 1 to 19 had died in either country. And this is really important, because you hear the teachers complaining, oh, I'm at risk, I'm at risk, I'm at risk. In fact, rates of infection among teachers in Sweden were lower than the overall population. It's because children don't spread this very frequently. Yeah, I know, it's hard to believe. Schools are actually probably a safer place for those teachers to go than Walmart or wherever they'd be, hanging out if schools were not in session. It is crazy, and it is so dangerous.
The CDC said today that you're more likely to get sick from being at home than you are from outside contacts. Yes. That's the vaunted CDC, Phil. And by the way, you say you caught the New York Times lying about a Korean study on viral loads in children? Because the report warns that school reopenings are going to trigger more outbreaks because older children spread COVID just as much as adults. Phil, what did the New York Times get wrong about asymptomatic kids? A lie. Go ahead.
This study is unbelievable what they're trying to use it for. You actually look at the paper. Their headline was older kids, bigger spreaders than adults, and Randy Weingarten's already using it to justify their health pretextual strikes all over the country. You look at the actual study, it finds that over 97% of the time, it's an adult that brings the infection into the home. Over 97% of the time. They found that 2% of the time, it was a child who did it. But that doesn't even tell the whole story, because Alastair Munro, the #1 pediatric COVID researcher in the world out of the UK, said he's seen the Korean data set. And in those 2% of cases, adults in the household actually shared the initial exposure. They were exposed at the same time that child was. And so you don't know which one brought it into the home, even in those 2% of cases. So this does not in any way justify what it's being used for.
I mean, Alex, is this a form of child abuse? Real quick, this is like child abuse. Okay, I find this to be abusive behavior.
Locking kids up at home is child abuse. Not letting them socialize is child abuse. Telling them that they're going to die if they go out and play is child abuse. It is all disgusting. It is the most disgusting part of this whole disgusting thing. And parents are starting to get furious about it.
Well, they better get loud and put their views about President Trump in the back seat. Realize he's the only one fighting for you and your families on this. Phil and Alex, thanks so much.